With World War II drawing to a close in 1945, Germany lay in ruins. As Germany caught itself fighting a war on two fronts, resources, and particularly manpower, began running out. The civilian death count reached an upwards of 3 million between the bombing and mass murdering during the Holocaust, while the military death toll reached 5.5 million. The nation could no longer sustain its fighting, and Germany surrendered to the Allies on May 7, 1945. At the Potsdam Conference held in July of that year, the winners of the war effectively reduced Germany's size by 25%. It was also decided that Germany would be divided into four occupation zones, to each be controlled by one of the victors: the Soviets, the Americans, the British, or the French. Under the control of the French that had endured great pain and casualties due to the German government, civilian life in southwestern Germany was turned upside down and would take well into the 50s to show signs of normalizing. My grandmother, Christel Hauger, was 7 when the French army entered southern Germany. She experienced the French takeover firsthand.
Because the French came in with tanks.
So you guys were hiding?
We were not, yeah, we were trying to hide from being shelled.
Yeah.
But when they finally came down the road, I remember being up at the windows and looking at them, and the Germans were waving white flags because
They wanted
to say, come on in and end all of this nonsense.
Mm-hmm.
The French entered with no intention of providing aid to the German people that had been suffering for the last year due to a lack of food and resources. The French people had faced over 500,000 casualties during the war due to the German attacks, and viewed their occupation as an opportunity to regain some of what they had lost. They assumed control over civilian life in all basic forms, and they took over my grandmother's family hotel and forced her family to serve their needs.
And then the French came and they took over my grandparents' house, and I was sent away because there was too much going on. They built jail cells in the house.
In your house?
In my grandparents' house, and they had prisoners and
what type of prisoners did they keep?
German prisoners.
And people that had fought in the war, or just?
Yeah, whatever they had crime they had committed or what they thought they had committed, and they locked them up and they tortured them. So since I was only 7 years old, my mother decided that was not a place for me, and my brother and I were sent to live with my father's mother and her daughter.
My grandmother was forced to leave her home in Uberlingen and live with her distant aunt and grandmother for 8 years due to the French brutality in her grandparents' home. Although she was safe from the violence in her home, the French exploitative attitude towards Germans permeated all areas of the southwestern region, and the German standard of living returned to its level in 1932.
We had chicken. So the French came in and counted what you had, and if you had so many chickens, you had to bring so many eggs to a central station. If you had 5 cows, we had to bring so much milk to a central station. And Germany had nothing after the war. We had no agriculture. We had nothing. They took anything of any value.
Yeah.
Along with food, the French also stripped Germany of the other few resources they had left to pay off the country's remaining war reparations. They deforested the woods and sent remaining coal back to France. This left the German people with almost no fuel to heat their homes in the winter. German life continued to be dark and bleak until aid started to enter the country.
After the war, the Americans sent food into the schools.
Oh yeah, with the Marshall Plan.
Yes. So
exactly.
In school after the war, I forgot to tell you, everybody for 6 days a week had a hot meal in school. Sometimes we got lentil soup and the worms swam on top. But white little worms. Yeah. We didn't care. We just put them inside and we ate it. And on Wednesdays we got a chocolate bar. A little chocolate bar for a kid.
But everything came from America, not
Everything
from France.
came from Americans, and the Americans...
And this was in the French area?
Yes.
The Americans sent food down?
Yes. The French gave us nothing.
America began sending food to damaged European countries in 1948 under the Marshall Plan. This program began to offer some hope to the German population that was living with next to nothing. The Allied forces eventually issued a proclamation on May 5, 1955, to end their occupation on Western Germany, but Germany had already been permanently scarred by the war and disparity during foreign occupation. My grandmother, for example, nearly 60 years later, is still scarred by this time period.
What upsets me the most when I see people looking at food and flicking it off. Even after all these years, when I see somebody in this family, meaning him, looking at something and saying, oh, I'm not going to eat that. Because There's nothing wrong with it.
Well, for you also, you were telling me how you don't look at food as this wonderful, enjoyable experience.
For me, it wasn't. It was just something to sustain you.
And so
It took the Western German economy and infrastructure until well into the 1950s to begin to recover from the war, while the effects on the country resulting from the Nazi regime and the Holocaust still exist today. It's easy to understand why the French wanted revenge for the pain they were forced to endure during the war by the Germans. But it's also easy to forget that there were children like my grandmother that were forced to suffer for other people's horrendous actions. Looking through the eyes of a then 7-year-old helps us comprehend how vast the effects of war truly are.